All right, I want to welcome you all here for this panel. It's a great pleasure to hosting this panel. We're going to start with Jamie McIntyre. He worked for CNN for many years, more than 16 almost. Many exclusives, including the day that we had, of course, the Pentagon being hit, 9/11. We had Saddam Hussein being arrested, so he broke that story too. Jamie brings a lot of experience when it comes to the insides and outs of the Pentagon. So when we're talking about WikiLeaks, he has a lot of knowledge how things are processed, the impact of things when it comes to reporting. So we will start with Jamie, and then our second panelist will be Jay Bender. Some of you know him from the law school, some of you know him from his J school. So he's teaching in both places, more than 30 years of actually representing newspapers, TV stations here in South Carolina when it comes to First Amendment. So his expertise when it comes to the legal parameters of WikiLeaks will be great on this panel. He also is the chair of Freedom of Information at the J school. And third, last but not least, Doug Fisher, senior instructor in the J school. Many years experience also with AP as a news editor, reported from different places, Ohio, Indiana, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and also covered a little bit of the military as well. Broke some stories when it came to secret weapons development and secret programs, one of them including the stealth fighter. So again, many years of experience from all of these panelists, and makes it very interesting to have all three of them here. Before we start, before I give the floor to Jamie, I just want to give a little bit of a background when it comes to WikiLeaks. How many of you know about WikiLeaks and what it stands for? Let's see a little bit, some hands on. Not that many, okay, a few. All right, a little bit of a background. WikiLeaks was founded in 2007. It's part of the Sunshine Press. It defines its mission to find files that the government or corporations and make those files public knowledge. It identifies itself as an international non-profit organization funded by human rights campaigners, investigative journalists, technologists, lawyers, and the general public. So, non-profit, and why we're here today, all right? Sunday, July 2010, WikiLeaks published a large volume, about 75 to 76,000 documents, classified documents from the military. The title of the publishing, the Afghan War Diary, and it covers documents from 2004 to 2007. It deals with all aspects of the Afghan war so far. And on its posting, WikiLeaks said the Afghan War Diary is the most significant archive about the reality of war to have ever been released during the course of the war. And of course, it goes with no say that the publication of these documents stirred a lot of controversy within the mainstream media, but also with the Pentagon. And we're still, this is an ongoing process. It has not been resolved. There has been some initial discussion. They tried to talk to WikiLeaks. They couldn't talk to them. They couldn't find actual legal representative of WikiLeaks. We tried to have the military to be present here, and we couldn't because it's a, what? It's a national defense issue now. So they cannot talk. They cannot access the website of WikiLeaks on their computers. So they're not supposed to have any contact with WikiLeaks at all. So we contacted the DOD and get some feedback on where they stand right now. So this is the response from the DOD. WikiLeaks has posted classified documents that were stolen from the US military. The DOD demands that nothing further be released by WikiLeaks. that all of the US government classified documents that WikiLeaks has obtained be returned immediately, that the WikiLeaks remove and destroy all of the records from its databases. So this is when it comes to the actual documents. In terms of WikiLeaks as its existence, what it does. WikiLeaks webpage constitutes a brazen solicitation to US government officials, including our military, to break the law. WikiLeaks' public assertion that submitting confidential material to WikiLeaks is safe, easy, and protected by law is materially false and misleading. And when it comes to the consequences, what the impact of the publication of the 76,000 documents, the DoD says the Secretary of Defense has made it clear the damage to our national security by the public release by WikiLeaks of some 76,000 classified documents, and the threat to the lives of coalition forces in Afghanistan and the lives of local Afghan nationals as a result. And last, we're most concerned with specific information on individuals, US, coalition, or Afghan citizens and current operations. So this is where we stand right now. This is an ongoing process, and I'll give the floor to Jamie to take it from here.
How many of you, by the way, how many are journalism students? Oh, okay. Any law students here? Oh, okay. I'm thinking maybe I'll concentrate more on journalism than law. All right, well, I'm Jamie McIntyre. As you've been told, I covered the Pentagon for 16 years for CNN. I left in December of 2008. And I'm just going to start out by telling you just a little story that's happened in the last 24 hours, because I think it illustrates an important point that I want to talk about WikiLeaks today. And that is, before I came down here, I appeared on the CNN program Reliable Sources, and I was talking about the firing of the CNN anchor Rick Sanchez. Anybody seen Rick Sanchez on CNN? Anybody? Look, all right, well, Rick was a somewhat controversial anchor who made some remarks, and I have a blog called lineofdeparture.com. In fact, I've written quite a bit about WikiLeaks, and if you care more about this after we're finished, you're certainly welcome to go to my blog and just type in wiki in the search bar, and you'll find all the articles about WikiLeaks that go into great detail about some of the things I've done. I've analyzed some of the things that they've released. So if you don't feel like you get enough from today's session, feel free. But I wanted to talk about today was, so I appeared on Reliable Sources, and I talked about Rick Sanchez, and I don't know about you. I have a, let's go back to my email here. I have a Google alert on my name. Do any of you do this by chance? Have you, so that if you ever show up in the news media, it gives you an alert, something that's, it's actually, once you start writing and publishing and doing stuff, it's a really good thing to do, because it right away keeps track of what people are saying about you. And what they're saying in here is, you can see a bunch of these that have just popped up, in which they all say that I said Rick Sanchez was a joke. First one says, Jamie McIntyre, former Pentagon correspondent, states that Rick Sanchez was a complete joke. Next one says, one of them says that Jamie thought he was always a joke. And what I actually said, I mentioned this, what I actually said, and I just wanted the transcript on the CNN page, so let me just go back over there. So here's the, CNN actually posted a transcript of all this. And what I actually said, I don't know if you can see this, was I said what he did on CNN was seen by many people in the industry as kind of a joke. Okay. Now, you may say, well, that's not all that different, really. Aren't you implying he's kind of a joke? But there's a difference, because for me to say, if I say Rick Sanchez is a joke, that's an opinion, that's debatable. We could argue about it. I might have my opinion. But it's a debatable opinion. If I say many in the industry see Rick Sanchez as a joke, that's actually not an opinion. That's actually a fact. That's verifiable. You can actually go out and find out if many people in the industry see him as a joke. And it's a subtle nuance. It's a little nuance. But in journalism and in reporting, nuance is really important. And the reason I mention that is because the concern about a lot of these WikiLeaks leaks and the information that they provide is the lack of nuance and context. There's a tendency to overgeneralize from them, to draw conclusions from them without having other information. And so it's just a little lesson in the importance of nuance. And my larger point here is, I guess, that the news media in general, and blogs and other folks in particular, sometimes don't do nuance very well. And that's gets at the heart of the reason that the government sometimes is so concerned about these leaks, is that this idea that we're not going to handle them well. Now, I have to say that as a journalist, I've wrestled with, why I'm so unsettled about this massive, unprecedented data dump by WikiLeaks, which posted, as you said, 75,000. Actually, there are 91,000 documents altogether. Some of them were held back, supposedly, for security review. And as a professional journalist, I have mixed feelings about it because I know that as a journalist, first of all, I've been on the receiving end of a lot of leaks from the government. And I know that they're a really good way to find out what's going on. If you have to rely on official government pronouncements to find out what's happening, you're in trouble. I also know that, sort of as somebody who's interested in history, that documents are sometimes your best source of information. Memories can be very faulty. Memoirs can be very self-serving. People have agendas. They don't always tell the truth. Documents tend to be much more reliable. So if you're a historian trying to go back and reconstruct what's happened in some important part of U.S. history, you really want to find documents. You want documents and people, and you want to put those two together and try to figure out what's going on. So in that sense, this WikiLeaks leak is a treasure trove of documents that could provide all kinds of insights into what's going on in Afghanistan, what is really going on compared to what the government says is going on. So in that sense, I sort of understand the value of it. I also know that despite all the sort of sniping back and forth, that what the government has said so far about these documents, which while it's stunning in the scope of the amount of stuff that has been released, so far there have been very few revelations of any significant wrongdoing. They do, however, provide a really interesting window on the war. Most of what's been in there has been pretty obvious to people who have been following what's going on in Afghanistan to any extent, including things like many civilians are killed by accident, but more are killed by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, that the U.S. has long suspected collusion between Pakistan and the Taliban, and they've complained about it bitterly in private, even as they try to cover it up in public. Many of the people fighting the war, including our allies in NATO, have misgivings about the war and the prospects for success that they don't acknowledge in public. But again, these are not big. These are what we used to call at the Pentagon blinding flashes of the obvious. But again, that's not to say that the documents aren't interesting and in some sense valuable to journalists. I have to say also that I bristled a little bit when these leaks first happened because people they kept referring to WikiLeaks as a whistleblower organization. And to call it a whistleblower is not just imprecise, it's also inaccurate. Whistleblower suggests that you're blowing the whistle on some wrongdoing. It presupposes that the information that's being released reveals wrongdoing. And so far, despite the fact that people have been combing through these thousands of documents, we haven't seen any documented case of significant wrongdoing in these documents. There are allegations of wrongdoing and war crimes in the video that WikiLeaks released prior to this. I don't know how many of you, have any of you seen the video of the U.S. Apache helicopter engagement in Afghanistan in 2007? I'm going to show a little clip from that in just a minute so we can talk about it. But so WikiLeaks is not really a whistleblower organization, it's an anti-privacy organization. As you heard, its tenet is that basically that nothing should be private that's held by governments or corporations, or for that matter, even private organizations and fraternities and anything else. They just don't believe anything should be secret. And it's not a journalism organization, it's got an agenda, and when you read the characterization of the documents on the WikiLeaks website, you get their interpretation of events. And so it's been very interesting that they've relied on mainstream organizations, the New York Times, the Guardian newspaper, Der Spiegel in Germany, to be the conduit to sort of put these documents in perspective. And that's what all of these documents actually cry out for, somebody who has an understanding and a perspective of them. There's a very interesting piece on the website of the radio show On the Media, NPR's On the Media. Anybody listen to that show? Excellent show if you're interested in journalism. It's once a week. You can download the podcast since nobody has to listen to the radio anymore. They did an excellent review, and one of the things they looked at was one of the Afghan war diaries that described a particular engagement, and then they matched it up with a reporter for Wired magazine who was there at the time of the engagement, and what you discovered was when you added what the reporter knew to what the document showed, you get a completely different picture of what happened in that engagement. And again, if you're interested, you could go to the On the Media website. It was in the July 30th show. They have a transcript in the MP3 file. You could listen to that if you were interested. But the point is that the documents themselves, by themselves, don't tell us the whole story. And this is where journalism is so important, because it's up to journalists to take these documents, to look at them, to match them up with other information and try to put them in context. And that's what WikiLeaks doesn't do very well. And that's one of the reasons why the government is so concerned about this release of information, because frankly, they're worried that the news media and the public can't appreciate the nuances, can't handle the truth, can't understand the difference between what is a legitimate engagement in combat and what might be a war crime. So I want to take just a moment, because I don't want to use up all my time here, but I want to take a moment and play just a little excerpt of this tape. So let's see if I can bring this up. Okay, here's the WikiLeaks tape. And I'm going to skip over a little preamble here. So we can get the, is it possible to take the lights down a little bit? So just to set this up a minute, just a second. So this is the tape. This was also posted by the WikiLeaks folks. This was posted months before the other leak. It's about an engagement that took place in Iraq in 2007. It's the gun camera video. This is the video that's recorded automatically by the Apache helicopter while they're in an engagement in Iraq. And in this particular engagement, 2 employees of the Reuters news organization were killed, a driver and a photographer who were with this group of men on the street in Iraq. And the military conducted an investigation, and they decided that they hadn't done anything wrong. Reuters requested the video under a Freedom of Information Act request, and they were denied it, although the significant parts of the video and a transcript of it were released as part of the investigation, but not the full video. And when WikiLeaks posted it, they titled this video Collateral Murder, and basically portrayed it as the wanton and mindless slaughter of innocent Iraqis walking down the street in Iraq. So we're going to watch just a little segment of it here. I'm going to skip over. This is the WikiLeaks preamble to right about, let's see, I think right about here. Let's unmute. So you saw that little arrow that says to lead with camera. That's the Reuters cameraman. He's 22 years old. He's carrying a camera with a long telephoto lens on it, which it appears that the Apache crew mistakes for a rocket-propelled grenade launcher or some sort of weapon. But of course, you have to remember, they're up in a helicopter, and they're looking down on us.
That's a weapon, yeah. Roger that. We have no personnel east of our position, so you are free to engage over.
Alright, we'll be engaging. Roger, go ahead. I can't get them now because they're behind that building.
Anybody been held up?
We got an RPG.
Alright, we got a guy with an RPG.
I'm gonna fire.
No, let's come around. We gotta go from our point of view.
Let's really go back here a second. You hear the guy say he's got an RPG, and I don't know if you can see this. Right over here, I'm going to point my cursor at it. Right here is a guy behind a building, and there's looks like a little tube sticking out. We now believe that that's the Reuters photographer with his camera with a telephoto lens. But the Apache crew has already looked at this is happening as there's an engagement going on nearby. The U.S. troops are battling insurgents, and they see these guys walk down the street. They believe they have weapons. They mistake, apparently, this camera for an RPG launcher, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. And now they're really convinced that they're dealing with bad guys that have significant weaponry, and we'll just keep on.
There at 1 o'clock. Haven't seen anything since then.
Once you get on, just open on it.
I see your element. You got about 4 Humvees along this.
You're clear. Alright, firing.
What's the state line now? Let me know when you see it.
Light them all up. Come on, fire.
All right.
Keep shooting. Keep shooting.
Postmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
Alright, we just engaged all 8 individuals. We're still firing. Roger.
6 is a 2-6. We're moving. We got that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's done.
Bye-bye.
God damn it, Kyle. Alright. I did it by text. Alright, you're clear? I'm just trying to find targets again.
Master 6 is a Postmaster 2-6.
Got a bunch of bodies laying there. Alright, we got about 8 individuals. We got one guy crawling around down there, but we definitely get him down. Or shooting some more. Got it. Hey, you shoot out top. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Crazy Horse 18, this is Hotel 26. Over.
They're currently engaging approximately 8 individuals, KIA, RPGs, and AK-47.
Hotel 26, you need to move to that location once Crazy Horse is done and get pictures over.
Target 20 is the location. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18. Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards. Nice. 26, Crazy Horse 18. Nice. Good shoot. Thank you.
Hotel 26.
Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
I'm going to just run just a little bit longer because it now comes a point, a significant point where they
Crazy
say,
Horse 18, Postmaster 7, go ahead.
you see another, a survivor,
Location of bodies.
who's trying to crawl to safety.
54588617.
And it's kind of interesting to look at this in real time, but skip ahead because
It's Crazy Horse 18, that's a good copy. They're on a street in front of an open courtyard with a bunch of blue trucks, bunch of vehicles in the courtyard.
so they're now directing forces on the ground to go to the area.
We'll let him know so they can hurry up and get over here.
He says there's one guy down there wounded and he's moving.
We also have one individual appears to be wounded, trying to crawl away.
Roger, we're going to move down there.
Right, we'll see the fire.
And this is significant because
We won't shoot anymore.
under the laws of war, we're not allowed to shoot the wounded.
Getting up.
if you're wounded and you're out of the battle,
Got that guy crawling right now on the curb? Yeah, I got him. I'm going to get around there, and then you guys are shooting over there too, so we'll see.
so they're looking at him, they got him in his crosshairs,
36 L this
they're not shooting him, because legally they can't shoot him unless he does something like pick up a weapon.
Trying to make sure that you guys have my turb over.
They're convinced these are bad guys that they've shot.
Come on, buddy.
They think they're some of the insurgents who were just battling U.S. troops.
Ready, push back to 5. Push back to 4, break. Here, right below you, right time now. Can you walk us onto that location, over?
This is 2-6, Roger. Off flares. We also have one individual moving. We're looking for weapons. If we see a weapon, we're going to engage.
So it's interesting, they're saying that they're not going to shoot him unless they can see him break the rules.
That's approaching and picking up the bodies.
Now a van is coming to apparently evacuate the body from the battlefield.
Individuals going to the scene, looks like possibly picking up bodies and weapons.
Hey, we need to stop that. We need down there. We need to stop. You see my look?
Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1. Hey, request permission to engage. Picking up the loading. Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let's shoot. The Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A. We're taking him.
They can hear the crews are anxious to hook up these guys because they think the bad guys are getting away. I think these are more bad guys coming to get them. But they don't have permission to shoot yet.
Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
Clear. Come on. Clear. Clear. Come around clear. Roger.
All right, I'm going to just stop it there. It goes on for like another 17 minutes. It raises. We later find out that there are 2 children in that van, and when the U.S. troops get there, they discover that there were children in the van and they're injured and they're taken to the hospital. And they begin to collect evidence and take pictures at the scene, and they find an AK-47 rifle and some rocket-propelled grenades, but not the actual launcher. And it's really interesting because if you watch this video, this is a story that just cried out for somebody to help you understand it and explain it, for a journalist who had access to more information that was on the WikiLeaks site to help you understand what the real issues were here. And the issues are, what are the rules of engagement? Did the U.S. troops follow those rules of engagement? Are the rules of engagement the right rules of engagement? And what did the investigation reveal about who these people were? And if the U.S. military didn't do anything wrong, on what basis did they reach that conclusion? And the other interesting, and the investigation, and I'll just cut to the chase here because I don't want to take everybody's time, I'm going to wrap this up, and we can talk about this more, but what the investigation found, in addition to the weapons there, was that these men were likely part of the force that had been recently engaging U.S. troops, that the Reuters cameraman apparently had embedded himself with the insurgents in order to get another view of the war. And by the way, journalists don't just cover wars from one side, they cover from both sides. But if you embed with the enemy and you're out with them and they engage American troops, it's a very dangerous way to do your job. By the same token, if you're embedded with American troops and they engage with the Taliban, you're liable to also get killed. It's significant that none of the, most of the journalists in Iraq were wearing press, usually bulletproof vests or things that had press on them. There were no press identification. It was obvious that there's no way the Apache crew could know that there were any reporters or news media in among this crew. The other legitimate question is, when can you shoot somebody who's wounded, and when can you shoot somebody who's evacuating wounded from the battlefield? Does the vehicle have to be marked as an ambulance? Does it have to have a red crescent on it? These are all really interesting questions that are not explored on the WikiLeaks site, and frankly, a lot of the mainstream news media didn't do a good job explaining them either. So, for most people have a very sort of simplistic understanding of this tape. If you just look at the tape without any outside information, it's easy to conclude that these are just sort of trigger-happy cowboys in a helicopter who just mowed down a bunch of innocent Iraqis walking down the street minding their own business. If you know a lot more about it, you can see it's a whole lot more complex. Just to wrap up, because I don't want to take everybody's time, I think that the really interesting aspect of WikiLeaks is that whether you shut WikiLeaks down, it's not going to stop. We're in the internet age where anybody can leak anything to anyone and can post it on the internet. The US government's going to have, and the military's going to just have to get used to that. I kind of compare it to these full body scanners that they have at the airport. I passed through one on the way here, where you go in and it takes this sort of hazy image of your unclothed body. But if you go on the internet, you can find this too. With just a little bit of enhancement, you add some color and increase the clarity. It pretty much creates a really clear picture of what everybody looks like naked. So there's two things you can do about that. You could fight this idea that our privacy is being invaded and no one should see us naked going into the airport, not anybody, not any screener, or you can just get over it and get used to it. But that's the new reality. And in many ways, metaphorically speaking, that's kind of what the government has to do. They have to kind of get used to the fact that they're going to have to conduct a lot of their policy, a lot more, you're going to have to walk around naked. Because people are going to be able to see a lot more things. One of the reasons that that these things leak to WikiLeaks is because one of the lessons the military has learned during war is that they have a lot of intelligence. It doesn't get to the people who need it, the people right on the front lines. So they push a lot more secret information down to the lower levels of people. And because of that, far more people have access to it, which is how this specialist who leaked this stuff to WikiLeaks was able to do that. And it is, by the way, against the law. The U.S. has a bunch of laws against, taking classified government things and leaking it to people. And people can be prosecuted under those laws, and this guy is being prosecuted. They can't really do anything much about WikiLeaks, and nor would I advocate that they do it, because once it's out there, it's out there. And I'm going to just wrap up so I don't take everybody's time.
Thank you, Jamie. Since we are in the law school, I get to talk about law. What surprises me about WikiLeaks is what took so long. We went into Iraq on a fraud. We're in Iraq on a fraud. We're in Afghanistan because we didn't have anything better to do with our army, apparently. We, the people of the United States, are in charge of our military. Why hadn't somebody spoken up? Where was the mainstream media when somebody suggested, some cowboy from Texas said we ought to go remove a dictator because he was a dictator? We deal with China every day. What made Iraq different? What makes Afghanistan worth what we're doing? There are laws regarding secret information, and it's criminal only if you reveal it with an intent to harm this nation or to aid a foreign nation in a time of war. The problem with WikiLeaks is, as Jamie pointed out, we have made information a lot more democratic with the internet. 1971, the United States tried to stop the publication of a history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Suit was brought against the New York Times and the Washington Post to enjoin publication. The Supreme Court, in rejecting that move by the federal government, said in 200 years of our democracy, we had never had the federal government try to enjoin the publication of a newspaper. A captain leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and the Washington Post. A private leaked 76,000, 91,000, 92,000. There's no idea how many documents there really are, or in fact what the documents are. How do you stop it? The fact that it is criminal seems to be of no consequences in this case. Where is WikiLeaks? Who is WikiLeaks? What is WikiLeaks? There's no one apparently in this country that can be made answerable for the dissemination of any of this information. I think what is going to happen is if the government wants to control information, and I suspect that there is somewhere in all of these documents, there may be something that has some compromise of our national security. How great a compromise it'll be, I have no idea. But where the government has in its possession the information, it's up to the government to control it and not punish those who receive it. Because unfortunately, if that had happened, those leaks that Jamie got might have made him a criminal. The receipt of the Pentagon Papers might have made the New York Times and the Washington Post criminal, yet instead, these were documents that put into perspective for our democratic society a war that had become increasingly unpopular because there did not seem to be any legitimate connection to national defense. A lawyer in Mississippi apparently has been in communication with the Pentagon wishing to work out some terms for the disclosure of this information, and the Department of Defense has attacked the problem as one of property. You have in your possession property belonging to the United States. Give it back. That's an interesting concept for information. These aren't paper documents like the Pentagon Papers. These are electronic impulses sent over the internet. Where is the property? What is it that the government wants back? So from a legal perspective, the government seems almost powerless to do anything except prosecute this private for sharing this information, whether it's the helicopter attack video, and I'm quite sympathetic to that. My twin brother was a helicopter pilot, gunship pilot in Vietnam. I understand the stress these people are under, but by the same token, the question needs to be put in the context, why are we there? What is it we're doing? Why have we put our people in harm's way? Why have we put the indigenous citizenry in conflict? This helps us realize that. What is the law going to do about it? I think nothing. I think that the New York Times, the Washington Post, Jamie's blog, could all publish all of the material on WikiLeaks, and as the law currently exists in this country, there isn't much that can be done about it, particularly if it's transmitted electronically, because there's no physical document that's being delivered to anyone. We need to ask ourselves, is that how we want the law to be configured? And we'll have some influence over that, I suppose, in a democracy. At least we can make an effort at that. But the law, if you want to preserve the confidentiality, has to act at a much different level than when it's being disseminated to the public. The law has to deal with this private or with the captain who leaked the Pentagon Papers. I think the fact that it's being transmitted electronically and worldwide makes the problem all that much more difficult for the government and for the courts. And my guess is we will see a private court-martial. There have been persons advocating that he be executed. I think that's unlikely, but I suspect he will be reduced in rank and may soon spend a few summers in Leavenworth, Kansas, in the federal military prison there. But for the rest of bloggers, websites, and mainstream media, there is no legal consequence to publishing this information. There may be quite significant ethical issues, but there do not seem to me to be legal issues. Thank you.
There, now it is. I'm going to sit here because I don't have a formal presentation. I want to react to some of what we've heard. How many of you now feel you have a better context for this war, having seen that video? how many of you wish that those helicopter pilots had had the context of knowing that there was a Reuters photographer now? So pardon me if I'm a little bit jaundiced about this context argument, because no one has a monopoly on context. And that's really where we're coming from right now. Just to elaborate on a few things, I guess to follow up a little bit on what Jamie said, my advice to governments would be to deal with it, because it is what it is. The world has changed. There was a time when context came from 3 networks and a handful of large papers. Now it's turned to where you are expected to find context. It's analyzed. Caveat emptor. It's actually kind of disturbing to me that very few hands went up about WikiLeaks, and that probably for many of you this is the first time you've seen this video. It ought to tell you something today. You have a job. You have a responsibility. You can't stay in your cocoon, or the people, or other people will be running your life for you in the future. This thing we call the internets, and I really don't like that term because it's far beyond that these days, this sort of digital cloud we're all living in, has sort of reached adolescence now, legally and ethically. And so we're likely to have a lot of temper tantrums. You know, give me the car keys, no, you won't give me the car keys. And a lot of shouting and screaming and that sort of thing. Because we're going to have to find some new equilibriums and some new legal situations. I think that's probably, in the next decade, going to be one of the central things that you all are facing and dealing with is what is this new equilibrium we live under in terms of privacy, in terms of openness, in terms of accessibility, what really as citizens is our responsibility to provide context, to seek out that kind of context. We may have new ways of assembling it, we may not, but certainly it is there if you want to find it. This is not the only case like this. Not too long ago, a corporation called Diebold. Anybody know what that is? Anybody from Ohio? Okay. It's a maker of many things, ATM machines, whatever, but one of the areas it's gotten into is voting machines. And a bunch of college students came across a cache of Diebold documents showing that their voting machines, their electronic voting machines, were subject to hacking and fraud and whatever. And they posted the stuff online. And Diebold sued them. Well, basically they just shut down that site and another site, rolling site, rolling site, rolling site. They got a whole network of college students just kept taking down and putting up sites, and Diebold finally threw up its hands and said, okay, whatever. And that's the way it's going to work. That's the way it's going to work. We are, I think that Jamie is correct when he says WikiLeaks is not a whistleblower site, it's really an anti-privacy site. And this whole idea of what privacy is in the 21st century is very much under review. You yourselves, if you post on Facebook, are in the middle of that. Think about it. Many of you do things that a generation ago someone would look askance at privacy. We are starting to see coordinated attempts by governments to begin to address some of these things. In France, they have a proposal called LOPSI 2, which, and you also may have heard recently, the New York Times reported the Obama administration is getting together a proposal that would essentially open a trapdoor in the nation's internet communication system, digital communication system, that would essentially allow governments to intercept and wiretap communication. And that's essentially what LOPSI 2 is in France. Of course, the problem is that when you open a back door to these systems, you also invite the hackers in too. Greece found this out to its chagrin a couple of years ago. The Greek government demanded that the telephone system, digital, which most phone systems these days are digital, open a back door, and one day their entire phone system was taken down pretty much by a hacker. So these are issues that we're going to have to deal with. Am I happy WikiLeaks exists? Yeah. Is it new? Not really. It's been done different ways, different techniques in the past. Anybody heard of Jack Anderson, the old Washington merry-go-round and all? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that his methods journalistically were the best, but he brought us first information on many things, not the least of which was the Bay of Pigs, which for you is in the history books, for me is real life. We also have our own government-sanctioned WikiLeaks. It's called the National Archives. The reason that the government likes that is it can control the release. The stuff's there, it's just really a question of who gets to control it and ultimately who gets to supply the content. So I'd suggest that that's really, in many cases, the questions that we're facing in the coming years.
The government is doing everything it can to try to stop the leaks. And one of the things they're doing is they're throwing the book at this guy who was the source of the WikiLeaks. They will prosecute him, court-martial, and try to send him to prison. They're trying to scare the sources into not leaking the information. They're also putting a closer hold on a lot of the information, which is they're not distributing it to as many people. One of the things is, if you don't want something to become public, if you don't want the secret to get out, the fewer people who know it, the better. But the problem with that, again, is that sometimes that means critical intelligence is not going to get to the warfighters who actually need it. So the government's going to try to keep a lid on this stuff. They're going to try to intimidate people. They're going to try to tighten their procedures. But leaks will continue. I don't think we'll see another one. I doubt we'll see another one on this scale. 10,000 90,000 documents. But definitely there'll be more leaks.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned, of course, the Afghanistan force. The same type of force existed in Vietnam. And it took 25, 30 years to bring it out, but it did come out. It's a book called Tiger Force. In fact, a good friend of mine won a Pulitzer for that book. So the stuff, you know, has floated. I think what the difference now, and in many respects, Jamie, I disagree, is the real-time nature of a lot of these things. That's really what's changed these things.
Well, not only that, everybody has access to them. So if somebody leaks to, you know, Seymour Hersh about the My Lai massacre, you know, he may have that information, but now we're in a situation where everybody in the world, including governments that are friendly or unfriendly to the United States, all have access to all of this source information. And that's, I think, essentially a big difference from the way it worked in the Vietnam War.
Well, plus, you know, history and time has a way of providing a certain context, too. So if something is coming out 20 years later, you have a different perspective on it than you do if it's coming out right now, as you know, again, real-time war.
Well, my name is Josie Brown, and I teach constitutional law here at WSC. And I just wanted to have one comment on the big and a question. So the comment relates to the characterization of the Pentagon Papers case. And it would be an overstatement to say that the Supreme Court has established an absolute prohibition on prior restraints. Rather, the Pentagon Papers case establishes that there's a presumptive invalidity to prior restraints. And they, in that particular case, several of the justices point out something that actually has emerged in another secrecy context. So, for example,